intellectual, spiritual conspiracy. Last night I talked about it at length. It'll be up on YouTube soon, but just to give a little summation of that. The idea of this being a conspiracy comes from, in my mind, just in the back of my mind, Dallas Willard's book called The Divine Conspiracy. Dallas Willard he died in 2013, was a very, very well-respected Christian theologian. Now, he wasn't a university theologian. In fact, at the university level, he was a philosophy professor. In fact, he was my philosophy professor when I was at USC studying philosophy, and he never talked about theology. When you read his Christian theological books, they are clearly for the sophisticated lay person, not arguing, again, abstruse theology, but trying to make theology relevant to a lay person. And and I would say a sophisticated lay person, because the first several pages of the book are about the problem of living in a valueless society where living by moral foundations, trying to live in alignment with God, is ridiculed in most places. If you go to college and say, I live by moral foundations and I want to align myself with God, you'll be laughed out of the classroom. So we live in a society that oftentimes is hostile to religion. By the way, if you want to read more about this, read Huston Smith's book. The name is escaping me. It's one of the he wrote well into his 90s. It's one of his last books. I actually taught it in one of my my Zoom classes. The name will come to me. But he wrote about a tunnel with 4 sides that we live in. And among the 4 sides was the media, was cinema, so on and so forth. And he said, it leads you straight to non-religiosity. So I'll just give you an example. I read the New York Times every day, but I remember reading an article where the author was apparently gleeful on how many young people were leaving evangelical Christianity. So they didn't say it, isn't it sad that people are losing their faith? It was more, isn't it great that people are leaving evangelical Christianity, as it's a good thing. I think from the perspective of the New York Times, apparently it is a good thing. For me, it's not a good thing, because I don't like people losing faith, even a faith I don't agree with, because oftentimes I've met people who are evangelical Christians. They really do live by a moral code. I mean, if a person tells me they're an evangelical Christian, I don't mind. I wouldn't be scared of bumping them into a dark alley at night, because they probably just try to convert me. So, that's the worst they would do. They probably wouldn't even try that, because they can't read their Bible in the dark. Now, if a person says, I'm not religious at all, I don't believe in anything, I say, well, let's get out of this dark alley and continue the conversation elsewhere. So, they say, like, who would you want to meet in a dark alley at night? Would you want to meet a evangelical Christian carrying a Bible trying to convert everybody? Yeah, that's okay. That would be fine with me. So I don't like to hear that even if it's faith I don't agree with, if I know the faith, from my anecdotal and cultural experience, if I know the faith keeps a person on a moral path. So Huston Smith in his book showed that we live in a society and a culture, especially what we'll call the intellectual culture, that oftentimes does not respect religion. I'll give you an example. I forget which state, maybe Louisiana, wanted the 10 Commandments in the classrooms, and boy, the ridicule that was directed at this idea that it violates the separation of church and state, so on and so forth. I want to take a sophisticated look at this. Oh, by the way, the 10 Commandments, as far as I know, are in the Supreme Court. So if it's good enough for you, it's good enough for everybody else. We'll put that aside for a minute. It's not what the 10 Commandments say, but what do the 10 Commandments imply? Now, by the way, what the 10 Commandments say would solve most ills of our society. Say that straight out. If people didn't murder, people didn't commit adultery, people didn't steal, didn't lie in court, didn't covet, right? What happened to the murder rate in America? 0. What happened to crime in America? Go down to almost nothing, right? So just the 10 Commandments. Think of how many things that would solve. And then if you add, don't take God's name in vain, well, swearing might go down, but I can probably live with that. So when people ridicule it, I think it's well to think about it. What if students came to school every day and says, don't murder, don't commit adultery, which means, keep covenantal promises, don't steal, don't lie in court, and don't walk around coveting what other people have. And let's say you looked at that every day and say, it's not about God, it's not about religion, it's about a moral code that everybody here should live by. Now, you can't do that. Why? Because it's in the Bible. Now, what if it weren't in the Bible? And you said, hey, folks, let's just come and remember what life's about. Respect other human beings. What's hateful to you, don't do to others. Don't go around murdering anybody. Don't steal from people. Don't lie in court. What if you had made no reference to this from religion? Would that be acceptable? Well, barely, but probably. But the fact that it came from religion, now it's a shanda. Now it's a scandal because it's found in the Bible, as if being in the Bible makes it possible. It makes it forbidden from the religion of secularity. So one thing that Dallas Willard is pointing out in the book, and he's quoting many people, he didn't quote Huston Smith. I don't know if Huston Smith's book had been out by then. That we live in a culture that there is a kind of an unspoken agreement to push religiosity out of the conversation of the I'll say the intellectual drivers of the culture. We're going to say the media and universities, et cetera. So you could call that a conspiracy. Now, so he's talking about a divine conspiracy. Let me tell you what Dallas Willard means by it and draw it back to our purposes. When Dallas Willard, remember, he's a very deeply believing Christian, that when Jesus talks about the kingdom of God, in my opinion, again, scholars of the New Testament agree we have no idea what Jesus said or didn't say. There's no absolutely reliable evidence. But let's say a Jewish preacher named Jesus spoke about the kingdom of God. Why do we think so? It's in the Kaddish. Yit Gadal Vit Kashmei Rabah, Ba'olam Divrach Malchutei, when the kingdom that God created and that God will. So these are completely Jewish ideas. The idea that we should live within the kingdom of God. Now, just as Rome, we might say, was the material world kingdom, there's a spiritual kingdom. So try to imagine living in the Roman Empire in the ancient world. If there's an empire that transcends language, that transcends race, that transcends all boundaries, and extends throughout the Mediterranean, and a Roman citizen wherever you go, it's a pretty astonishing idea. When on one hand, when we think about Pax Romana, Roman peace, it's like oppressive. But if you read other histories of the Roman Empire, it's an incredible thing that there's something called a citizen of Rome could be worldwide. So I think from a spiritual perspective, a person could imagine, what if there is a kingdom of God? Now, it's a thoroughly Jewish idea, but typically was pointed to the people of Israel. We try to push other people to live in the biblical kingdom. So if Christianity, had an expanded focus, bringing everybody in the kingdom of God, what would that mean? So it's a certain kind of a consciousness. And from Dallas Willard's perspective, is living in fidelity to Jesus. And I would just want to expand it beyond that. Let me give you an example. Dallas Willard mentions a friend who was a scientist and felt the vacuity and meaninglessness of life, and went to his living room one life and decided to give religion a chance. And he tried to meditate on Christ. His life was filled with light and love, and he decided to meditate on Christ every day. Well, the person can only meditate on Christ because he grew up Christian and Christianity was all around him. If he was a Jew living in Jerusalem, he probably wouldn't go into his living room and meditate on Christ. If you were living in China or Japan, or India, probably wouldn't go to his living room and meditate on Christ. So if I were to see this, from a worldwide perspective, it's a person who decides to meditate on whatever their culture delivers over as something called the divine, and how it's expressed in the day-to-day mundane life, including the moral life. I think every culture has a different name for it. So from Dallas Willard's perspective, the name for it is Christ. But I don't want to limit this idea to one religion. Dallas Willard has to, because he's an evangelical Christian and a lovely human being. I studied with him. But let's think for ourselves, right? That through this push of a valueless society. All opinions are equal. There's no real right or wrong. You can study about ethics, but we won't teach you to be ethical. And if you believe in something called the divine, that's quaint until you're in a 12-step program. Then it's utterly serious. But until you're trying to become sober, belief in God is a very unsophisticated thing to say. No, that's our culture. So it's something of a conspiracy, but never conspired. It just happened. Now we can discuss how it happened and why it happened, but not today. So the conspiracy would be, let's conspire back. Let's conspire right here. Right? We're going to have a divine conspiracy. And on our conspiracy is moral realism. There really are better and worse answers to moral questions. There really are. Now, we don't know what the answers are, but we know there are answers. That's the important thing to know about moral realism. We don't know what the answers are, but we know there are answers, which means the moral quest is a valid quest. It's an important quest. We don't know exactly what you'll find, but we know it's worthwhile, and you're not searching for nothing. You're searching for something. In addition to that, we'll say the spiritual quest is a valid quest. The spiritual quest has many, many dimensions. Is there meaning in life? Is there purpose in life? Is there something called the divine? Those are worthwhile questions. And there's wisdom for approaching those questions. So if a person says there is no value, there is no vine, there is no purpose, there is no meaning, don't engage in the quest. So that's what he would call, I don't like the idea of evil, so I'll call it the valueless conspiracy. Again, it's not an intentional conspiracy. It kind of happened in our society. By the way, the effect of the valueless society we see in college campuses, because moral and spiritual nature abhors a vacuum. So if people have nothing to believe in, they'll believe in anything, which I think explains this strange mixture of neo-Marxism and Islamicism that has captured the imagination of people on college campuses. Now, this is utterly absurd and ridiculous that people suddenly believe in neo-Marxism and Islamicism. Why? Because they don't have anything. And at least Islamicists are serious. That's what they have over them. Their professors aren't serious. Their professors aren't teaching the truth. Sad to say, a lot of liberalism has just become religion of social action. And then you talk to a Marxist or Islamicist, they seem to mean it. I would say it's probably the one thing they have going for them is they utterly mean it. And young people want to live lives of significance. They don't want to live a valueless life, a purposeless life. They want to have significance in their lives. They want to stand for something. Now, how do you stand for values? How do you walk around standing for values? Well, when you want to fight for Gaza, whatever that means, which means, genocide against the Jews, destroy the state of Israel. And remember, Hamas says, and America's next. I mean, they're very open about it. Israel now, America is next. They're very open. In fact, you saw someone who, in the graffiti in Washington, D.C., Hamas is coming after you. That means you. Okay, they're utterly serious about it. So on one hand, that's despicable. On the other hand, they're not valueless. They stand for something. So try to imagine you're looking for value. You're looking for some kind of significance in life. And someone says, well, you can live a dreary, mediocre life of valuelessness, or I'll give you significance. Now, the significance will require you to be a murderer and a terrorist and lose your moral core, but at least your life will be significant. They'll go, okay, I'll destroy property and beat people up and advocate for the genocide of the Jews. As long as they don't have to do it. It's what I call slacktivism. Yeah, murder Israelis, but I'm not going to go try to do it because those Israelis have guns. And I don't want to be that serious about my search for significance. I wonder if the symbolic action on October 7th, if Hamas is regretting it. Everybody says it's time to stop the war. Say, why? They started it because they're losing. By the way, that is a strange maxim. You stop war, when the other side is losing. I don't think any nation would live by that kind of maxim. All right, so the idea of God's kingdom, one problem of living in God's kingdom is it doesn't rise to the level of great, public significance in life. You don't camp out anywhere. You don't demonstrate. You don't destroy property. You don't write graffiti. You're respectful of other people. You're not screaming and yelling. You're actually a little bit understated. So living a life of moral decency doesn't scream out significance. So where does the significance come from? Well, I think one thing is community. We gathered here is very important. I mean, it's significant that we come together and study on a Shabbos. Any coming to any community of study of morality and spirituality is significant. Right?
Oh, I thought you said it was cooler.
I can ask everybody to make sure that you're all muted. Okay, everybody, make sure your machines are muted.
Oh.
And then, of course, the inner significance, and that's very difficult for many people to see your moral search and your spiritual search to be of utter and profound significance. So that's one thing that Dallas Willard is arguing in his book, the profound significance of the what I'll call the moral and spiritual search, and now bringing it over to us. My larger question of how does human transformation take place? Well, human transformation takes place, first of all, and I'll use the metaphor, that we want to live in the kingdom of God, which is remember, a thoroughly Jewish term in the Kaddish every time we read the Kaddish. So Malchut Shemayim, the high holiday, Rosh Hashanah, is permeated with the idea, pardon me, excuse me, with the idea of Malchut Shemayim, the kingdom of heaven, as it were. And that's one of the themes of Rosh Hashanah. You heard me talk about it year after year, that on Rosh Hashanah, you consciously accept that you live in a moral and spiritual framework. You don't live in an empty world. You live in a moral framework. And your job is to build out the frame and stay within the frame. Now, every Rosh Hashanah, we celebrate this idea. It's a thoroughly Jewish idea. Now, what happens is, of course, there are forces within you that resist the moral framework. We could call that the Yetzer Hara. So when you put a moral framework in your life, it's typically going to touch on something that your Yetzer Hara does not want to snap into, does not want to live by. And that's the importance of living by a code, is you discover your Yetzer Hara. So first of all, let's say that the spiritual moral conspiracy is living in Malchut Shemayim, the kingdom of God. Now, I want you to meditate on this, that we live in a material world. We live in a world where there's a government, where there are civil and criminal laws around us, that we break to our peril. But try to imagine there's a spiritual, like a cloud, descending on all of us, which is a spiritual and moral reality. And you have an obligation to discover it and live by it. And really believe that, really take that seriously. So let's say every day you want to accept upon you the yoke of heaven, which is how we say it in Jewish texts. It's called Ol Malchut Shamayim. Ol is the yoke, Malchut Shamayim, the kingdom of heaven. I want you to think about that idea. The yoke of the kingdom of heaven. Ol, yoke, kingdom of heaven. How do you take on the yoke of the kingdom of heaven? When you say the Shema. According to the rabbis, now it doesn't say it in the Shema. From the rabbi's perspective, saying the Shema is accepting upon yourself Ol Malchut Shamayim, the yoke of the kingdom of heaven. You're putting that yoke on yourself, and you're saying to yourself, I don't get to behave any way I want. I don't get to say anything I want. I don't even get to think any way that I want. I should focus my consciousness on things that actually liberate me from my Yetzer Hara, and not let my thoughts go wild into into dark pits. Now that takes training. It takes practice. But when you commit yourself to it, that you are going to live in the yoke of the kingdom of heaven, and you're going to yoke your mind, your emotions, your thoughts to this yoke. Now, you've heard me say many times the word yoga comes from, or the word yoke comes from yoga. What is yoga? The one yoga that many people know of is hatha yoga, which is breathing yoga. The different ways to that your body into postures. You might say, stretch out your body and liberate you from stretch, but that's only one of the 8 yogas. If you look at the Hindu tradition, there are 8 yogas, and hatha yoga, the yoke of breath, is only one of the yogas. Another yoga is called the Raja Yoga, the Royal Yoga, which is the yoke of the mind. There's a yoke of the mind. There's another yoga called the Devotional Yoga, was the yoke of connecting yourself to the divine. And then there's ethics yoga. I don't have all the words memorized from the Sanskrit, but I find it wonderful to study, by the way. And I hope one day do a comparative analysis of the 4 noble truths in Buddhism, if I have that right, and the 8 yogas in Hinduism, and the various Jewish ideas. They all speak right into one another. So whenever you think of the yoke, think of number 1, hatha yoga. Okay, the postures are pretty precise, and now try to apply that to your mind. The Raja Yoga. There actually is a yoga of thought. There's a yoga of devotion. There's a yoga of behavior, just like there's a yoga in the yoga studio. Now, think of everybody going to a yoga studio if they went to a mind yoga studio on how to think well. Then they went to the devotional yoga studio on how to connect with the divine. Then they went on the ethics yoga studio, how to be a person of righteous conduct. Okay? Let's say all of these were our yogas, which is what Judaism is. Judaism is a series of subsets of the yoke of heaven, which breaks down into several other yokes, like Hinduism, although never organized as well as Hinduism, including the yoke of good thinking, the yoke of reasonability and rationality, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, of course, the Yetzer Hara does not like any of this. The Yetzer Hara wants to break out of the yoke. It wants to be a wild animal. It wants to be, the horse does not want to be domesticated. Does not want to be, as it were, broken, meaning the wildness is tame. So how do you do it? This is the main point that I've come to my conclusion in a different way. The way you do it is through a practice, which means you have to have a yoga. You have to have a yoga. If you want to do yoga, there's these postures you got to do. You don't say, I do yoga, but I never get on the mat and I never do the postures. Well, you're not doing yoga. Okay. You don't think about the yoga. You actually have to do it. So how do we actually do the yoga of the kingdom of God? How do we actually do it? Well, for me, it comes down to, again, because I'm Hasidically oriented, the main thing is the study of the Siddur, the prayer book, the poetry of the Siddur. I'll put that aside. That actually takes a lot of practice to master that. But something available to everybody here is the yoga of the study of the Bible, right? You have to, you show up to the study of the Bible, especially Psalms, Proverbs, but, throughout the prophets, there are so many wonderful parts of the Bible. You just open it up, you find something that's meaningful to you, you read it over, you read it again and again, you look at the different translations to find the one that's best for you. You try to memorize a few phrases. You are doing a yoga of thinking. You're doing a yoga of contemplation. Many parts of it, there's a yoga of right conduct, especially in Proverbs. So the study of text, especially Psalms and Proverbs, is our yoga, meaning the yoke of the kingdom of heaven. So Dallas Willard would call this the divine conspiracy. Just as there is somewhat of a disorganized conspiracy to push value, meaning, purpose, ethics, spirituality, and the divine out of our lives, it's a disorganized conspiracy. We have to have an intentional conspiracy to push back. And I think we push back one person at a time, one family at a time, one relationship at a time. one religious organization at a time. And whatever religious organizations do, I think this has to be a core of the mission of any religious organization, is using this Jewish idea, the yoke of the kingdom of heaven. All right, that's my teaching for this morning. I have time for maybe one or two questions before we go to the concluding part of our service. Anybody have any questions about the idea of the Ol Malchut Shamayim, the yoke or yoga of the kingdom of heaven, as a way of bringing the inner life, as it were, into a conscious living within the spiritual and moral framework?